Hi, good afternoon, everyone on the East Coast, and good morning to folks on the West Coast and everyone in between. Welcome to our session on Unions for All, Respect Us, Protect Us, Pay Us. We're here this afternoon with a really incredible panel. We are being joined by an expert on labor law, on an organizer, an SEIU organizer, and two workers that we're going to be hearing from. We are going to be hearing from each of our panelists shortly. They're each going to have time to present to you, and we invite you all to put any questions that you have for the panelists in the chat, and we will be asking questions, we'll be pulling questions from the chat to our panelists after each of them has had an opportunity to speak. So this afternoon, our panel will be addressing issues facing workers of all races in this country. Workers of all races, led by Black and brown women, are coming together across industries and geography to write new rules for workers. And the laws in this country, the labor laws in this country, were written for a time and for an era that we no longer live in. And we're going to hear about that shortly from Professor Ruben Garcia from the University of Nevada Law School. The labor laws at the time they were written and continue to be focused on industries that were dominated by white men workers, and many workers were actually written out of the labor laws. And the workers, I think not coincidentally, that were written out of the labor laws were immigrants and women of color, and jobs that immigrants and women of color work in predominantly. And so we're taking those outdated and racist labor laws that excluded workers of color and women, and we're making a bold demand that all workers should have a union, and there should be an opportunity for all workers to join a union, and there should be unions for all. And so we're going to talk about challenging structural racism and sexism in labor law. We're going to learn from workers and organizers who are advancing these breakthroughs for racial and economic justice and the new strategies to win for all workers, so all workers can join together in a union no matter where they work, no matter where they live, regardless of the color of their skin or their gender identity or sexual orientation. So we're going to begin, as I mentioned, with a Labor Law 101. There's a link to the bio. I'm not going to give the bios of each of our speakers because I'd rather give them a chance to speak to you. But their bios will be placed in the chat as they speak. Our first speaker is Professor Ruben Garcia from the University of Nevada Labor Law School. Welcome, Ruben. Great friend and colleague, and just incredible inspiration to all of us. And Ruben, you've done a lot of thinking about the history of our nation's labor and employment laws and how they really reflect the racist and sexist assumptions of our society at the time that they were written, and how those assumptions are really at the core of so many of our policies. And I'm hoping you can set for us, before we move on to our other panelists, an historic and legal context for our conversation today. So welcome, Ruben, and thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here for this timely panel, and really looking forward to hearing the stories of the workers that are in the middle of these struggles. But we really, as you said, Nicole, we know that the deck is already stacked against workers in this economy in many ways, and particularly so in this COVID economy that we've been in for almost 2 years now. And we have, of course, in the pandemic, we saw this movement for racial justice. We saw the George Floyd killing, and we saw the movements to achieve racial justice. And so these movements, coalesce together, and we see, and it became clear. I mean, it was clear before these movements, but it became clear that the deck is even more stacked against workers of color, women, and immigrants. And so, as you mentioned, and I'll talk about, this has been baked into the law for some time, right? We have the first federal protection for collective bargaining and for concerted activity in the 1930s in the New Deal, and that excluded, as you said, agricultural domestic workers. And the historical record is very clear on why that was done. It was, there's often talk about, well, there's certain sensitivities about agriculture, family farms, or working in the home that collective bargaining is just incompatible with. But actually, again, in the 1930s, it was very clear this was needed for Southern buy-in to federal labor law reform. Again, the first time that joining a union was protected, and all based, as we'll also see today, on employee status, which, as we've seen in the struggles of today and in the past, is also racialized in many contexts. And the other important thing about the history is that not only did the law have these exclusions baked in, but it also omitted any duty at the time for unions or employers not to discriminate on the basis of race, sex, national origin. And that is why there was so much, unfortunately, discrimination against employees and by unions and employers at the same time through the 1930s and the 1940s. And it wasn't until the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that unions were required by statute not to discriminate on the basis of race and color and national origin. But since the 1930s, of course, we've had a number of statutes intended to protect all employees, right? And that's, again, supposed to be a broad coverage. It was written into the law to be the broadest coverage possible. And yet in our economy today, we see a number of instances where people are denied employee status, and these instances often track race and immigration status and national origin. So that's why, even if you have a quote a neutral principle of employee status, that the way it's applied and the way, of course, that bargaining power works in this country is that, as we see, it's often the workers who are the least with the least amount of bargaining power, also the workers who are with tenuous immigration status, or women or people of color. So in this last century, then, we see the proliferation of various labor and employment laws intended to protect workers, and they, again, all had margins, and that was actually the title of my first book, Marginal Workers, which I have right here, to basically say that these margins are fissures in which workers of color, generally immigrants and women, tend to fall between and betwixt, right? So you have laws on anti-discrimination, on equal pay, but the law has holes in it that workers lose protection in. And also, actually, when we look at not just collective bargaining law, but also minimum standards law like minimum wage and overtime, we see there too, there are holes in the law that are like the domestic worker exemption, or the companionship exemption for home care workers, or the tipped wage, which we see again in restaurants, that basically means and has meant a large number of workers not getting the minimum wage, and also disproportionately the victim of wage theft. So that's the next thing, again, that I'm working on in terms of how to sort of deal with those gaps or margins in the minimum wage, that we can actually achieve better protection and better racial justice. So we see, again, the changes in the law are not enough generally, even when we have, almost 100 years of protective labor laws. And of course, even when workers got the right to organize in the 1930s, there had to be a labor movement. There had to be social movements to actually bring some better protection than already existed in these workplaces. So that's why I think that this panel is so important, because it shows, even despite the gaps in the law for gig workers and for domestic workers, home care workers, we see a lot of organizing going on in spite of the law. And that's generally throughout our history is generally what it has taken, and in intersectional organizing as well. Like you have where I am in Las Vegas, or immigrant Latinas in hotels, basically organizing in unions, and Black women home care workers organizing here on the ground as well. So you see hopeful signs, I think, in the work of all the people on this call and the others with them. And hopefully, again, soon we'll see some change at the federal level. But again, I think the smart money is to not wait, for those changes, real soon, and continue organizing, like I know so many people here are doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruben, and for your wisdom and contribution. And folks, just to remind you, if you have questions for any of our panelists, you can put them in the chat, and we will get to Q&A after all of our panelists have spoken. So our next panelist is Lenora Thomas. And so I'm going to ask the host to bring Lenora onto the screen. Lenora Thomas is the Deputy Director of Healthcare here at the Service Employees International Union, SEIU. And I have the privilege and honor to be counsel to Lenora and her campaign to help organize millions of home care workers in this country. Lenora, we just heard from Professor Garcia that care workers, a workforce that's made up primarily of women, women of color, immigrants, were largely carved out of the legal protections that were extended to other workers over the last really 100 years of labor and employment laws in our country. Can you explain to us and describe what SEIU is doing today to build power for this workforce, which, as I understand it, due to the aging population, we call it the graying of America, or the silver tsunami, sometimes we call it. This is really the fastest growing job in America. So what are we doing at SEIU to help strengthen the power of these largely women of color workforce?
Thank you, Nicole. And as so many people have already said, this workforce was carved out during President Roosevelt's New Deal. And what SEIU is doing is really working diligently to make sure that that no longer continues. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go through a few slides of what our long-term care campaign is doing right now. So slides, please. So the long-term care crisis has exploded in the midst of three simultaneous pandemics: COVID-19, the economic crisis, and continuous violence against Black people and immigrants. With all of this, our workforce has not been defeated. In particular, home care providers are 87% women, 62% people of color, and more than a quarter of this workforce is Black. SEIU home care members have fought and won union rights, higher wages, and benefits. Our fight has led to a historic moment. For the first time, the President of the United States has centered caregivers in an economic recovery package. This happened when then candidate Biden introduced his Build Back Better plan last July, and he included an investment at the time of $450 billion in home care. He is continuing to advocate that investment is now specifically towards home and community-based services in a $400 billion investment, which would potentially create 1.5 million new jobs. So who are home care workers? Home care providers it's 2.4 million home care workers nationwide. As I said, 87% are women, 67% are people of color, 30% are immigrants. Home care is one of the most in-demand and fastest growing jobs. Our nation is facing a skyrocketing need for care. By 2028, we'll need to fill 4.7 million new care jobs as 10,000 people turn 65 every day. We can't turn away from this crisis any longer. We have been screaming it for years, and finally, the pandemic just brought about a change. Home care workers provide the essential care, companionship, and quality of life that consumers need to live longer, happier, and more active lives. Because of home care workers, working families have the peace of mind in knowing that their loved ones are cared for in the place that they feel most happy and comfortable. More than half, 54% of home care workers in the U.S. receive some form of public assistance. This is because the median wage of home care workers is $11.73 an hour. These poverty wages have caused 17% of this workforce to live below the poverty level, and then 47% are at 200% below the poverty level. 29% receive food and nutrition assistance, 33% are on Medicaid, and 39% of home care workers in the U.S. do not have affordable housing. Among the 1 in 3 home care workers who are immigrants in the U.S., 45% do not have citizenship. Roughly, as I said, roughly 10,000 people turn 65 each day. And by 2028, the U.S. will need to fill an estimated 4.7 million home care jobs, including over 1 million new jobs. Almost 1 in 5 net new jobs created over the next decade are projected to be either home health aides or personal care aides. The Associated Press reported new polling that found the majority of Americans would, of course, prefer to age in place at home rather than relocate to an independent or assisted living facility. The survey, conducted in late March 2021 by the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, also found 63% in favor of more funding to help low-income people age at home. A poll recently published by SEIU and Hart Research Associates showed that more than 80% of U.S. voters support the home care investment proposal. So despite the essential nature of home care workers, they've been, as we said, systemically denied the same rights and labor protections that have propelled white working Americans into good jobs and economic security. The U.S. labor laws, the New Deal era, guaranteed minimum wages, overtime pay, retirement security, and unemployment compensation to many workers, but it excluded domestic workers whose jobs were coded as Black women's work. In 2015, that's right, 2015, after years of organizing and fighting for basic rights and labor protections, home care workers finally won federal minimum wage and overtime protections of the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, for all home care workers in the U.S. Still, in many states, home care and domestic workers are still denied the right to join a union. So the result, home care workers are chronically underpaid, too often forced to live in poverty and rely on a broken social safety net. As you can see here, President Biden is committed to making sure this workforce isn't left out this time. And we are clear that because he's committed, we're also going to hold him accountable. And we're really fighting to make sure that we pass Build Back Better, which would secure this investment, this substantial investment in home and community-based services. So what does this investment look like? The $400 billion would expand services. It would raise wages, a path to a good union job. It's an investment in women of color. And a home care worker could go from working 3 jobs to 1 job as long as they're able to earn a fair living wage. So there are 4 pillars of our care policy proposal when we get to the nuts and bolts of what is it that we're actually asking for. And so we're asking for an increase in funding to expand access to home and community-based services, more money involved in the system, which would expand which would create a workforce infrastructure within Medicaid that would create more jobs, a public rate setting process that accounts for the wages that people receive, and a pathway to citizenship. So how can you help? We just talked about the poll. 81% of US voters are saying, yes, get this done. We want this investment. And we need to make sure that we continue to let Congress know that. So here's how you can help. Call Congress and urge them to pass Build Back Better. Text CARE, C-A-R-E, to 787-753. Once again, text CARE, C-A-R-E, to 787-753, and you will be connected to your member of Congress to make a call. We're trying to generate as many calls as possible to keep this at the forefront of Congress to make sure that they know this is vitally important. Thank you.
And as David Ward mentioned in the chat, people are welcome to ask any questions about home care worker, but for now, home care workers and our SEIU organizing campaign and Build Back Better to Lenore or to other questions to Professor Garcia. Now we're going to move on. Our two next guests are workers who are organizing in the field, trying to form a union, fighting for justice and to be respected, paid, and protected. Our next speaker is Bart Perez. He is a leader with the Fight for 15 and a union movement and a McDonald's worker. Hi, Bart. Thank you for joining us. I understand Bart is also going to be speaking in Spanish, and we have an interpreter who's going to be coming online. Hi, thank you for joining us. So, Bart, the question I have for you is that fast food workers have been organizing for 9 years and have really been the tip of the spear in changing our whole discussion in this country about the minimum wage. As a result of this organizing, and I really want everyone to understand this, it was really the fast food workers that began this movement of the Fight for 15. 26 million workers in this country have gotten a raise, and those raises have amounted to $150 billion in wage increases. So thank you for your leadership. Half of this money is going to workers of color. And then in California, fast food workers are going even further. Knowing that $15 an hour isn't enough, workers also need to have an ability to have a voice on the job. And you have been a fast food worker for 30 years. As a leader in the Fight for 15, will you share with us your experience working as a fast food worker and organizing in the Fight for 15 and a union?
Gracias. Muy buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Bartolomé Pérez. Trabajo para McDonald's por hace 30 años. Comencé a trabajar para McDonald's en 1990, cuando el salario mínimo era de $4.25 la hora. En una década, mi salario mínimo solo había subido a $8, el equivalente de 37 centavos por año, cuando el costo de vida era alto. He estado organizando y luchando por un salario justo y por respeto en nuestros lugares de trabajo. Desde el 2012 que comenzamos la lucha por 15, no ha sido nada fácil. En el 2015, con todas las luchas organizadas, logramos aprobar la ley de salarios mínimos de $15 en California. Si bien es cierto que muchos de nosotros que trabajamos en las grandes ciudades ya ganamos $15 la hora, hay algunas ciudades que ni siquiera ganan $15 en este momento, sino que hasta el próximo enero esta gran victoria vino a organizarnos en nuestras tiendas, a hacer huelgas y exigirles a nuestros políticos que escuchen a los trabajadores.
Matthew, we have not been able to hear anything you've said. I think you're on mute. If you could unmute and translate from the beginning, that would be helpful.
My apologies. I don't know what happened with technicals.
We
Can
can
you
hear
hear me
you now. If you could start from the beginning and translate what Bart has said, and then we can go back to him, that would be great.
Perfect. Good morning. My name is Bartolome Perez. I worked for McDonald's for 30 years. I started working for McDonald's in 1980 when my minimum wage was $4.25. In a decade before joining the 5 for 15, my minimum wage was only went up to $8, the equivalent to 37 cents per year when the cost of living was high. I have been organizing and fighting for fair wages and respect on our workplace since 2012. We started 5 for 15 where it hasn't been easy. In 2015, with all the organized fight, we managed to pass 15 minimum wage as a law in California. Well, many of us in big cities really have 15. Well, the state won't even be making 15 until next year. This big victory comes from organizing our stories, going on strike, and demanding our politicians listen to the workers. Continúa.
Tener que hacer huelga por cambios en cada tienda de corporaciones y franquicias para que nos escuchen no es fácil.
Having to strive for changes in each store and franchise to be here, it hasn't been easy.
Cuando estamos organizando en nuestras tiendas, tenemos que luchar contra el miedo que tienen los trabajadores, miedo a las represalias, a ser despedidos por hablar. También es difícil cuando se enfrentan a diferentes tipos de abusos, como acoso sexual, robos de salario y violencia. Estas son algunas razones por las que muchos tienen miedo de hablar. Por eso necesitamos unión para todos.
When we are organizing in our stores, we have to fight the fear of the workers, fear to retaliation, fear to being fired for speaking up. It is also difficult when they face different abuse. Workers face sexual harassment, wage theft, and violence on theirs. That's why some of them are afraid to speak up. This is why we need unions for all.
Pero nuestras leyes laborales no están siendo respetadas a la vez. Es difícil para los trabajadores de la comida rápida afiliarse a un sindicato de la manera tradicional. Es por eso que necesitamos nuevas leyes que nos ayuden a mejorar nuestra industria.
But our labor laws are broken. It is hard for workers in fast food to join a union in the traditional. That's why we need new laws that help us improve our industry.
Es por eso que necesitamos la ley AB 257, Fast Recovery Act, una ley que nos dé una voz dentro de la industria de la comida rápida.
That's why we need the law AB 257, Fast Recovery Act, a law that gives us a voice with the fast food industry.
AB 257 le dará lo justo a los trabajadores honestos y pobres para trabajar y establecer estándares laborales más altos y justos para todos. Hay 500,000 de trabajadores de comida rápida en California.
AB 257 will give hardworking people in the fast food a chance to work towards setting higher and fair worker standards for everyone in our industry. There are 500,000 fast food workers in California.
Los trabajadores de comida rápida sabemos que tenemos derechos y responsabilidades, pero hoy solo tenemos responsabilidades. Los derechos hoy solo los tienen las franquicias, las corporaciones, junto a su CEO.
Fast food workers, we know that we have rights and responsibilities, but today we only have responsibilities. The rights today only belong to the franchise and corporations together with their CEOs.
Con la ley AB 257 Cada trabajador de la industria de la comida rápida tendría una voz más fuerte y un asiento en la mesa. La AB 257 finalmente incorporará a los trabajadores en el proceso de reescribir los reglamentos laborales. Nosotros somos los que tenemos la experiencia porque somos los que hacemos el trabajo y estamos en la primera línea. Sabemos que al mejorar la industria ayudará a que los negocios funcionen mejor y garantizará que podamos hacer nuestro trabajo de manera segura y con dignidad.
With AB 257 law, each worker in the fast food industry will have a louder voice and a seat on the table. AB 257 will finally bring workers into the process to rewriting the rules. We are the experts because we are on the front lines. We know what improvements will help the business run smoother and ensure we can do our jobs safely and with dignity.
No queremos que nuestra industria sea olvidada o dejada atrás. Es por eso que los trabajadores de la comida rápida continuamos unidos y luchando por lo que necesitamos. Hasta ahora, muchos de lo que hemos logrado proviene de ir a huelgas, tienda por tienda y desafiar franquicia tras franquicia. Pero en este proyecto de ley podemos trabajar juntos para mejorar toda la industria. No lo haremos dándoles dinero a los políticos, como las corporaciones lo hacen. Lo haremos haciendo un verdadero papel en el proceso.
We do not want our industry to be forgotten or left behind. That's why fast food workers continue uniting and fighting for what we need. So far, a lot of what we win come from going on strike store by store or challenging franchise after franchise. But with this bill, we come together to improve the whole industry. We won't do it by giving politicians money like corporations. We will do it by having a real role in the process.
Muchísimas gracias y esperamos que con la ley AB 257 podamos servirle una hamburguesa con dignidad.
Thank you very much, and we hope that with this law AB 257, we can serve you a hamburger with dignity.
Thank you so much, Bart, and thank you for the interpretation. Our next speaker is Luz Laguna. Luz is a leader with the Mobile Workers Alliance, and she is a gig worker. She is an Uber Eats driver. Hi, Luz. Good to see you again. So, Luz, you just heard from Bart, who works in fast food, and the gig industry, where you work, is another workforce that is not protected by any of the laws that Professor Garcia described to us. The gig economy workforce is really, you all are not even considered employees in most states, which is just, as you know, means you're not protected by the laws and protections of the states and the benefits that workers receive when they are considered employees. Mm-hmm. So I know that California tried to change that by passing AB 5. And I think even those of us who live outside of California heard of AB 5 because it was so exciting and such an important law. And but then the companies struck back and they spent more than $200 million to pass a ballot initiative called Prop 22. And that reversed AB 5. And it took all those rights and protections away from workers, the rights and protections that come with employee status. And they spent more than historic amount of money to get Prop 22 passed. And right now, thanks to really incredible legal work of SEIU, Prop 22 and some really brave workers, Prop 22 is now in the courts and the court has said it's unconstitutional. But I think we really want to hear about your experience both as a gig worker and what you did to fight Prop 22 when that ballot initiative was on the ballot in California. And welcome, Luz.
Well, thank you for having me. I got started doing Uber after I lost my job as a passenger service agent. I lost my job during the holiday season when I had to take my maternity leave. I was really active organizing with the union at LAX. I was targeted by management at the airline contractors I worked for and fought back against my unfair termination and won my case, but I don't want to go back to work there. I started driving for Uber in 2017, and I heard LAX drivers were organizing, so I looked for a union for drivers because I knew what having a union meant. It means better pay, better benefits, and having better protection on the jobs. Eventually, I was able to connect with Mobile Workers Alliance, which is an organization made out of thousands of drivers standing together for better treatment and right to form a union. Workers, including gig drivers, won a major victory when California lawmakers passed AB 5 a couple of years ago. It's one of the nation's strongest protection against workers' misclassifications. AB 5 meant that companies like Uber and Lyft had to treat us as employees. And it meant that drivers like me will have the protection that every other worker in California already has. But the gig companies didn't want to follow AB 5, so they spent more than $200 million to take away our rights, making Prop 22 a campaign, the most expensive in California history. Uber and Lyft could have invested that money in their workers and provide us with the pay and protection that we deserve as their employees. Prop 22 made it really clear to me that Uber and Lyft don't care about us. They only care about their profits, even though we're the ones who go out there and do the work for them. The gig companies don't value us. Prop, I know that if Prop 22 passes, I wasn't going to be protected. It meant that Uber and Lyft will push all their responsibilities and risks onto us drivers while profiting of all the work that we do. Driving for Uber is a challenge every day, and that's only gotten tougher with the pandemic. I get up at 4 in the morning, 5 days a week, and work 10 hours each day just so that I can make a living. Right now, I drive for Uber Eats, and for each delivery, I get paid between $2.45 and $5, depending on how long it takes me to deliver the food. When I pick up a passenger, I don't know how much Uber or Lyft are charging riders. All I see is what they paid me for the ride. When I get paid, it doesn't get into the account the time it takes me to drive to the restaurant or pick up a passenger, or the cost of gas, car insurance. Uber and Lyft don't pay drivers for the time it takes for us to pick up an order or a passenger. At the start of the pandemic, Uber and Lyft said they would provide masks to their drivers for free, but I only got masks from them once. I was told supplies were limited. I have to pay for all my cleaning supplies and masks I need to drive. Uber and Lyft didn't provide us the training on how we can keep ourselves safe outside of handful of emails and messages on the app. They did, however, let us know that we can buy sanitizing equipment from them. Gig drivers like me are essential workers. We keep working to make sure people were able to travel, and we kept working to deliver food and groceries as people sheltered in place. It's been especially difficult as a single mother. Not only am I a sole provider for my kids, but also a full-time job being a parent, a teacher, and a nurse for them. Uber and Lyft should be helping us because without their business wouldn't exist. The gig company's millionaire executive are able to work from home while we're on the front line. Prop 22 made the companies even less responsible for our safety, and it kept us getting the benefits and protection that California lawmakers passed to protect working people during the pandemic. If drivers get sick on the job, we don't get workers' compensation. We don't have access to state unemployment, and the federal unemployment program that gave us some help has now expired. Thankfully, a court in California has overturned Prop 22 and ruled it to be unconstitutional. Uber and Lyft are fighting this ruling again instead of spending money to take away our rights. Uber and Lyft could be using that money towards improving our pay and recognizing us as employees. I am confident that at the end of the day, justice will be on our side and Prop 22 will be history. During the 2020 elections, gig drivers joined together to speak to as many as voters as possible. We had actions and rallies so that voters could hear directly from us. We sent 1 million texts to 1 million voters. I live in LA, but I drove up to San Francisco as part of Gig Driver Caravan to protect our side of Uber headquarters for their refusal to follow AB 5 and for trying to pass Prop 22. Even after Prop 22, gig drivers didn't stop organizing and speaking out. We heard about our most recent victory with our court ruling Prop 22 is unconstitutional, but we've also held actions to expose how unfair Prop 22 has been to drivers. The gig companies promises a lot of things to the drivers to get us to support Prop 22. They said that we will get assistance, get health stipends, but a lot of the drivers have had difficulties getting them. There are also the issue of drivers getting unfair deactivating. Being deactivated means drivers is barred from using the Uber and Lyft app, from getting passengers or deliveries, and there are very few ways the drivers can get these companies help us. Just this past week, I've had a problem getting my money I've earned from Lyft. Lyft only paid me $5 for 3 days of work, and when I tried to get them fixed, it just kept me getting sent back to the app. I want to close up by talking about what gig drivers want. We want what everybody wants. We want to be treated with dignity and respect. We want to be able to provide for our families, have health care, and pay time off when we're sick. The best way to do is that gig drivers can be treated as employees that we are, and for us to have the right to form a union. When workers stand together as in a union, we have a stronger voice in the workplace. And we have a way to make sure that companies are following the law. We can negotiate for better pay and better protection. And on November 3, we're going to have an action. And please follow Mobile Workers Alliance in every social media. And I won't stop speaking out and organizing with fellow gig drivers until we get our union and respect that we deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luz, and to all of our panelists. In a minute, we're going to bring back onto the screen Lenore and Bart and Luz and ask them to tell us as participants in the panel. And I understand that we have in the audience almost 60 people. And so I know that there'll be an opportunity for each of you to take action. You know, what I was struck by this panel was, you know, hearing Professor Garcia talk about the ways in which the laws, when they were written, excluded so many workers, and how those very same workforces are the workforces, the excluded workforces, that have grown and continue to be among the fastest growing in this country. And so the home care workers who were excluded from our nation's laws, it's a fast growing job. The fast food workers who work in an industry where, because of the franchise system, it is so difficult to form a union. And the gig industry, again, where we have millions and millions of workers who are not covered by any of our federal or state labor and employment protections, that those jobs are the fastest growing jobs, and millions of people are working in them every day. And so it was such an important coming together of workers and organizers in this presentation. So we're going to bring back on Lenore. We'd love to hear what all of us can do to help the effort to organize home care workers? I know you described some of the action we can take, but if you can really tell us, what's your call to action? What do you want us to do?
Absolutely. So, we talk about this a lot as it relates to voting and the recent elections. This is the workforce that delivered the White House in November in states like Georgia, Michigan, and Nevada. And then in January, turned around and delivered the Senate in the special election in Georgia. We are no longer going to sit back and allow this workforce to be left out when we continue to deliver election after election as women of color, and voters. So what folks can do is text CARE, C-A-R-E, to 787-753. Once again, text CARE, C-A-R-E, to 787-753. You're going to receive a prompt and just reply call, and it's going to connect you to Congress. And so we want to generate as many calls as possible and ask Congress to pass Build Back Better with a substantial investment in home and community-based services.
Thank you so much, Lenore. And we're going to bring you back on camera in a minute for our Q&A. And a reminder, if people have questions for our panelists, all four of them, please put them in the chat. And we're going to bring Bart back with his interpreter to give us your call to action. Bart, what can we do to help your fight for in California and across the country? What can we do to help?
Bart, ¿qué es lo que puedes decir para la llamada a la acción a la audiencia para que puedan ayudar y apoyar a tu lucha?
Bueno, antes de resaltar lo que yo quiero que primero vean de que esta no es la lucha de Bartolomé Pérez. Esta es la lucha de más de 500,000 de trabajadores que estamos en el nivel de pobreza.
But before I continue, I just want to be sure that I mentioned that this is not only Bart's fight, it's the fight of 500,000 fast food workers that there are need their support.
Y a la vez que en 30 años de servicio yo debería estar pensando en mi retiro. Y sin embargo, estoy en el salario mínimo, igual que muchos jóvenes que están empezando a trabajar en esta industria, que ignoran la realidad que nosotros hemos vivido en toda nuestra vida.
And just to say that after 30 years of being working for this industry, I should start thinking already on my retirement. But with $15 as a minimum wage is not possible. And I just want to mention that this is an industry. There's a lot of the young folks are going to be affected the same way that I was when I started working on this industry.
La dignidad no tiene precio. Una ley que podemos luchar juntos para empoderar a muchos jóvenes no tiene precio. Yo no sé dónde pueda venir a parar un hijo mío, un nieto, que le toque trabajar en esta industria, que ahorita estamos en el nivel de pobreza para ser los futuros homeless de la ciudad. My apologies. It's really hard for the young folks. The dignity did not have a price for those young folks that are start going to join the fast food industry, and it's really hard to imagine where they're gonna end up because the way that they've been mistreated and the way that they are not giving us what we deserve, those young folks, they can also end up as a homeless. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. And now we're going to bring back Luz Laguna for her call to action. We're going to bring back Luz for her call to action for how we can help gig workers who are trying to form their union.
Yes, well, the way that we can all support each other is, by having, the same voice for each other, because we are all you know, the population of immigrants, not immigrants, that are stable here in the U.S. is that we all want decent wages, and even if we have decent wages, it's still not going to be enough for us to be able to provide for our families to have a decent protection for a living. I have heard companies and also other businesses that do support, gig workers, or those workers that are still in the minimum wage, especially those who have struggled in the past and trying to survive, with for whatever minimum wage they always bring up a year. I think that in order for us to have decent wages is for us to always try to organize, and to have more labor protection, and to for those who have already have their work secure because they're already union, and for them to keep on helping us, those who are already union employees, or union that are in under a labor union, to keep us helping us for those who still don't have the same voice, because we're the ones who are struggling more. I always think about a decent retirement, and the only way that we can be able to protect is by sharing our experience, but always make sure that we do support right away the each and one of us, the cause that we're fighting, because we all want solutions to have better wages and better protection, but most of all to have secureness in our jobs, and to don't think about it twice or three times, like texting, just like for the home care givers, we have to start doing that as soon as we hear that there's a fight going. We can't stop. We can't stop, because if we think about it twice, then you know what, those numbers are not going to change in order for us to make changes here in our communities.
Thank you, Luz. So we're going to bring back all of our panelists now, and our interpreter. And I do have some questions for the panelists, and we have a few more minutes where we can ask the panelists questions. And actually, I'm going to take Luz's call to action and begin by asking Ruben. We're working to get funding for home care, to change the laws at the federal level with the PRO Act and with laws to protect public sector workers. But are there things that we can do in the states to better ensure that all workers have labor law protections, even as we try to make changes at the federal level? What can we do at the state level?
Thanks. Yes, there actually are many things that can be done at the state level, and I think you've heard some examples of them here today. Bartolome talked about the bill in California that would basically establish minimum standards for fast food workers, right? And that is a legislation that has been done in other states and other localities, and is critical. In addition to the other reforms that we've talked about here today. But as you heard from what happened in California with AB 5, there are going to be disappointments, right? And there are also going to be disappointments on the home care front, as we've seen from the Supreme Court, basically making it very hard for home care workers to organize unions at the state level, right? But these are, again, as I said in my comments, these setbacks for the law are going to happen, but there always is organizing basically to work against these sort of legal setbacks, and I think the stories we heard today really show the power of that organizing even in tough legal times.
Thank you. My next question is for Lenore. The home care workforce that you described is really different than the factories of the 1930s that our labor laws were crafted for. What challenges does the workforce and the way home care workers work create for organizing a union? And how do you overcome those challenges of just a different kind of workforce? It just not just in terms of the workers themselves, but the physical work is different? How do you overcome those challenges?
So SEIU already represents about 750,000 home care workers. So we definitely have figured out how to organize them. They are ready to, the vast majority of home care workers we speak to are ready to join a union. It's just a matter of having the conversations. And so it's less about how do we get to the workers and more about how do we make sure that there are laws and funding available for these to become good union jobs. So we're definitely ready and equipped to organize.
Fabulous. So for both Bart and Luz, I think a lot of the people who are listening are consumers of the services that you provide. They're consumers of the services of the gig economy. They're consumers of fast food. And my next question is, what can consumers do? Is there anything consumers can do that can help you and support the workers in these industries? I don't know, Luz, if you want to go first.
Sure. I think that I have always visualized Cesar Chavez. When he went out to Europe, to talk about how people can stop buying these grapes or the wines from the grocery stores, but mine's going to be a little bit more different. I think that the only way that we can help protect our work is that voters, we should we should always educate more on voters, because usually these gig workers companies like Lyft and Uber always use the same language as union, how we were organizing, but they just changed the little language a little bit more different to confuse voters. So the only way that we can try to change this is by for all the voters to really support us, since they already know how these gig companies already cheat us when it comes into elections.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you. I don't know if Bart wants to add a word. The panels are all recorded and will be available to all of the participants in the conference. If folks want to tell their friends about this panel, and maybe people who didn't have a chance to see it. And I really want to thank all of the panelists and to the conference for inviting us. And I'm going to actually see if we have 1 minute, if Bart wants to give us the last word. I want to honor him with the last word of our panel.
I just need to translate the question to him. Bart, la pregunta era que si tú pudieras decir de qué manera los clientes o la comunidad pudiera apoyar el movimiento que estás haciendo.
Bueno, de la mejor manera es de que la historia es la que nos da la respuesta, ¿no? Hace más de 50 años, Martin Luther King Jr. estaba luchando por derechos del salario mínimo en las tierras. Nosotros hace 9 años empezamos la misma lucha, celebrando 50 años de ellos. Y recordemos que nuestras comunidades necesitan hacer conciencia social para exigir derechos y no defender intereses económicos de políticos.
I just think the story is the one that it talks by themselves, right? Like what Martin Luther King was fighting for all the rights for the people's rights. And right now we start our fight 9 years ago to fight for this the rights that we still struggling to have. And that will be the ones that will make a difference to stand up for those beliefs, for those my apologies.
Perfect conclusion. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. This has been a really inspiring panel. I hope we all follow your calls to action.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you guys.